Today we're going to talk about this project I've been working on. It's part of my digital doctoral portfolio. And what I was researching was equity in urban education. And so I started off by doing some research, finding all these different research projects that researched what factor, what program, what strategy would help urban students become high school graduates and then go on to post-secondary work. So in my paper, the way I defined equity was the basically, the ideal or the purpose of education, right, is to help kids set them up for success in their future, right? Like whatever career they want to go into, they can reach that career. They can make that decision, they can make any option, they can decide what they want to do. So I thought if a system is equitable, that means that they are graduating from high school and they're going on to post-secondary, because that is the goal of every single education system. And so I looked at the research, pulled out the strategies from the research, and then asked urban educators, what do you think? And so I have asked my very, very good friends to join me today and have a conversation about urban education and what she thinks would bring equity to the system. So we can introduce ourselves. I'll let you go first.
All right. I am Cassie Sweeney. Like I said, I'm a very good friend of Erica's. Um, I came into the field of education in a very untraditional route. My undergraduate degree was in sociology. And while I was doing that, I was very passionate about the effects um, of the inequity and the everything that was going on in education. That was kind of where my passion lied. And so as I was graduating, I was trying to think of like what's my next step? Like how am I going to impact this field with the sociology degree? I didn't have a teaching certificate. I didn't go that route. So I was like, what can I do? I found a program called Teach for America that helped me get into the field of education. And I then taught what was supposed to be just a 2-year commitment ended up being a 14-year commitment because I just love the students that I taught with teaching middle school English language arts in a urban school in St. Louis. Um, I loved teaching middle schoolers. I know it's not for everyone, but I absolutely enjoyed it. I love how they're sassy. I love how they're coming into their own personalities. I love how they're starting to form their own opinions. Um, I just love working with middle schoolers. And so after about 14 years, I decided it was a time for a change and I wanted to have a broader impact in the field of education. So I transitioned into a role as an academic advisor for an alternative teaching certification program, which was the same program that I went through to get my initial certification back in like 2008. And so now I work with teachers who are wanting to make career changes into becoming certified teachers and work in urban education as well.
And also, she's a fabulous teacher. Like, of course, she will never brag on herself, but she's like the gold standard of ELA teachers. And
You're
I
being too nice.
it's no, it's the God honest truth, like the God honest truth. So I wanted to be an educator since as young as I can remember. I went the traditional route. I went and got a degree in education and got a master's in education. Came out and didn't know or was trying to get a job and didn't get a job. I applied everywhere, applied at all the districts, and I didn't get hired. And then finally got hired at an urban middle school. And so it was kind of like by luck that I wound up at the urban middle school. I had initially wanted to be a high school teacher. And so, but as I got into the career, I really loved it. I loved working with urban middle schoolers. I love all the same things that you love. They're like the realest of real people. They will tell you straight up, what they think and feel about everything from your teaching abilities to what you
Your wardrobe.
wear.
Yep.
And I love that part of them. And so, Cassie and I worked together for over 10 years, 13 years. We worked
Yeah.
14 years we worked together. And she became like the mentor I really needed because the mentors I had were not really supporting me like I needed to. And Cassie just took me under her wing. Like I moved into ELA after like more like 5 years, 5 or 6 years. I moved into ELA because they cut the social studies program, and I didn't know what I was doing, and so Cassie took me under her wing and made me the teacher that I became, which
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
I would I would definitely say
I
that.
think that we got really lucky, Erica. I think that we got exceptionally lucky because the ELA team at our school all worked together very successfully, right?
Hmm.
It was just like when you work with people that truly have the best interest of kids at heart, and you work with people that are truly motivated to do anything that needs to happen in order to have student success, and you all get along too, right? That's another benefit, right? Magical things happen. And we just got very lucky because, I know you came in not knowing a lot about ELA, and I was like trying to explain things to you, but you caught on so quickly. And it eventually came like we were able to bounce ideas back and forth. And, you being the sixth grade teacher and me being the seventh grade teacher, I always felt like we were at an advantage because you kind of give me a heads up about what they were masterful at sixth grade and what they still needed or were struggling with when they came to seventh grade. So I was better prepared to step in from day one and, help support the kids in our building. And the same thing happened as they went to eighth grade. And so our team of ELA teachers working together effectively and cooperatively and willingly like really truly led to that success. And I think that's one of the reasons that our building was so known throughout the district was because
Hmm.
students in our building were all excited about reading.
Hmm.
We put together this incredible reading program for our students that we just made, right? Like we just created it.
Hmm.
We worked our butts off to secure resources so that we had relevant, high interest books in classrooms that students could check out. And they were all proud to carry their books around with them. And it was so funny because we get other teachers from other classes that would complain, oh, I can't get them to put their book down in math class. And they'd come complaining to me, right? They're not doing their math work because they want to read. But, truly, because of all the hard work that we put in, it just became this culture of literacy in our building that, we just became known for around the district. And, not to
Hmm.
toot our own horns, but, hey, I think that, the success of teachers that are, cooperative and collaborative really have dramatic impacts on student reading and desire and want to read and want to learn and want to be academically engaged. And
Hmm.
even if the other math teachers are complaining that they won't put their reading books down in their class.
I know. I kind of want to be like, hey, look, yes, they need to put the book down. You're absolutely correct. They definitely do. But
What a great
they're
problem to
reading.
have.
Um, so after 13 years of teaching, I moved into the school counselor position because well, there's lots of different reasons. Mainly, I saw that, there were issues going on with the students in class beyond academic. There was,
Mhm.
lots of social emotional issues going on. And so, I wanted to kind of be the like fill in the gap between teachers and students and try to figure out ways to help kids, come to school more, be more engaged in their classes, and Yeah, so just helping to fill in the gaps where there really were a lot of gaps.
A
So,
lot.
so yeah, that's why I went into the school counselor role, and that's where I am today. Um, so anyway, I'd like well, we're already having a wonderful conversation, but I wanted to kind of start off with a question about like what do we think equity is? Like, what does equity look like in urban education? Like, if we had a system that was completely equitable, what would it look like?
I think that that's a really important question and a really loaded question as well, right? And I
Yeah.
think that what equity looks like in one district would be very different than what equity looks like in another district, right? So when we're talking about equity, we're talking about giving kids the tools that they need in order to be successful, regardless of what those tools are. When we look at like a one size fits all, that's not equity. We have people that have additional needs, special needs, or they are significantly below grade level, or whatever the various needs are. Providing that student with the tools and supports that they need so that they can access the grade level curriculum, so that they can be successful, so that they can go on to high school and be successful, so they can go on to college or, a trade school or whatever their, after high school plans are and be successful. And so, in my mind, when we're talking about equity, especially in urban education, it's going to look different than a more affluent school district or a school district in a different type of setting, whether it's rural or, suburban, or, there's just a lot of different social factors going into what students need, and what
Mm-hmm.
their life experiences are and how that impacts what they need in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So just a little bit of background about me for our listeners is that not only, was I also an educator for 14 years and now an advisor for an alternative certification program, but I also have two children that have special needs as well. One is very mild. She just has a little bit of a reading delay and a speech delay. She's doing excellent. And then my youngest daughter, Ellie, she has cerebral palsy and she has a lot of significant needs. And so what equity looks like for her in the classroom is very different from what equity looks like for, another typical neurotypical student who is, meeting all the
Right.
requirements. So, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I,
Right.
and then going into that too, there's a lot of things that, are preventing equity from happening in school districts. When we look at school districts that are coming from families that are low income or under-resourced, oftentimes the resources are not there to meet the needs of the students.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's
Exactly.
funding for school materials, whether
Mm-hmm.
that is funding for staff, that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the district is just not able to meet the needs of the students that are in their districts. As a seventh grade teacher, I had students in my classroom that were reading anywhere from a beginning reader level. I'm talking pre-primary, I'm talking preschool, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the way up to a college level. And so as a seventh grade teacher, where we have seventh grade curriculum and that's all we have, I am trying to meet the needs of everyone to make sure everyone is moving forward, regardless of where they're starting at, and having to differentiate instruction, having to find resources that the district isn't providing, to help them on their pathway of moving forward, whether that's, filling that achievement gap, whether that's, enriching them from where they are. And a lot of time, the districts don't have the funds or the support staff to do that. I can't tell you how much money I paid on my pocket just to get the resources because my students need them. And, thankfully back then I was single and didn't have any kids. So I was able to afford that, but that's no longer the case, right?
Yeah.
You can't expect teachers to have to work a second job to pay for their first job, right? Uh,
Right.
and
Pay
then
for
on
their
top of
hobby of teaching.
right, I always joke with, yeah, I need a second job to pay for my teaching hobby. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but on top of that, the support staff is significantly needed, especially when you have students or a population that is so far below grade level or has significant needs. I can't tell you when I was working with my district, how many times things were cut. Like we had this reading intervention program, right? It was called Read 180. And or we had Achieve 3002. Those were two programs that the district adopted for a period of time. And the goal was to support students that were significantly below grade level. And so sometimes they would go to that in um, instead of their traditional grade level ELA class, sometimes they would go to that in addition to, it kind of depended on where they were. Um, but, as budget cuts happened, what ended up happening was those programs got nixed. So those were no longer there available for students. Or, even worse was when they started cutting teachers. And I'm not talking like extra teachers, like, related art teachers where they're doing like, music and, band and all these other really cool things that happen during the school day. I'm talking just social studies teachers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, they would cut
Yeah.
social studies teachers because it wasn't a tested area, and that's a place that they felt that they could cut, um,
Mm-hmm.
staff. And so what ended up happening is it honestly, in my humble opinion, it just widened the achievement gap because,
Yeah.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
nothing is in isolation, right? So when we're doing English language arts, that has to do with fiction, but also nonfiction,
Mm-hmm.
their lack of knowledge about the world around them that they would have picked up on social studies to provide some background knowledge for their English language arts class is no longer there. I mean, I taught in St. Louis, and I can't even begin to tell you how many students in my class thought that St. Louis was a state. They didn't realize it was a city.
Yeah.
Um, you know, the if you asked them where Washington, D.C. was, they had no idea. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Many of them had never even seen the arch, and it was like, 20 minutes from our school.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about equity, we're talking about providing students with the basic resources that they need to be successful and access the curriculum so that they can move on. And unfortunately, when we're looking at urban education, a lot of the times funding is a major barrier to that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, let's just say the funding is there, right? Like the funding could possibly be there, but the way they allocate those funds can just be ridiculous. So, you were talking about the Read 180 program.
Right.
My guess would be Read 180 was millions of dollars, right? Just paying for the platform, paying for the resources that went along with it.
The licenses, because it was like license per student, right?
So they pay for those licenses or they pay for those materials like one time. So they allocate a million, 5 million, whatever it was,
It's an
and then
astronomical number, right?
right. So every year you have to keep paying for those licenses and keep buying those resources. And even if the program was completely successful, which I don't know how successful it was, I mean, maybe it was successful. If you don't continue on with this, if you don't keep it consistent, then it's absolutely ineffective.
Or execute
If
it with fidelity too, right? That's another
right,
big one.
if you don't have dedicated staff who are able to, with fidelity, do the program, and continue to allocate the resources toward it, like if you only put maybe let's just say it's 4 years, and they're not really putting time into this program, it's not going to work. It's not going
I
to
can't
work.
tell you how many times, because I was good friends with the Read 180 teacher when we had it at our building. I can't tell you how many times she came to me and she's like, they're just shoving more and more kids into my classroom. We are beyond capacity. It was supposed to be like small groups, and they were supposed to rotate through stations. And then there was
Mm-hmm.
a station with the teacher, and so she was required to both teach her small group at her desk on a specific skill, but also monitor the students that were working on skills on the computer and also monitor the students that were working on independent reading at whatever level they were at. Because it was
Mm-hmm.
kind of a highly tailored program. And so she was be like, I can't tell you how many students they've shoved into my class that I can no longer do this effectively. But
Mm-hmm.
also, I don't have enough materials. I don't have enough of the books to give each student a copy of it. I don't have let's be real, reading books like novels and they're they're not meant to be used over and over and over and over again, right?
Mm-hmm.
They break down, especially when they're
Mm-hmm.
being used at that high frequency. And she'd be
Yep.
like, the books are, it's been 5 years, nothing's been replaced. They're
Right.
falling apart. Or some of them have gone missing. Great problem to have when students steal books, honestly, truly. Um, great. Right. But like, things have gone missing, things have fallen apart, nothing's been replaced. And it's like, I want to execute this program effectively, but here we are. Um,
Right.
and so it was a big issue. It's one of those things that is done with really good intentions, excellent intentions, and has the potential to be extremely effective. But again, you need the resources, the staff, the ongoing training, the replenishment of resources. It needs to be a reasonable class size so that it can be done effectively. There's just so much that goes into it aside from, just it being a line item on the district's budget.
Right. And well, two things come to mind. Like, first off, it was a program that had like a, computer based, for the licenses. And
Oh, making sure the
like
computers work, there's that too.
our kiddos don't have, at least at that time, they didn't have that comfortability with technology.
Oh yeah.
And I would say they're still working on that. Like, that's something that's still growing in our kiddos, because they've just recently, with the pandemic, gotten one-to-one technology. So, it can take a generation before they really are truly comfortable using technology, not just for,
Social
fun
media.
and games, but for education, like using it academically, because it's two different mindsets. Like, if you're looking at a computer or looking at a iPad or a cell phone and you're thinking, I use this for fun, like this is where I play games, because you haven't had the opportunity to really use it for academics, then yeah, you're not going to get as much out of it as you possibly could. um and then the
I
second thing that comes to mind is someone downtown, or someone at district office is looking at the data, right? They're looking at the numbers coming out of Read 180, and then they're like, huh, it was really working for that first year, but it's not working anymore because look at these numbers, they're not improving or whatever.
But they don't
Um,
know the other factors that go into that.
so they don't have like a focus group where they're sitting down and talking with teachers, like what, I mean, I have never heard of one. The Read 180 teacher, did she go to a focus group? Did she sit down with someone downtown who's making those decisions?
No.
It's kind of all done in isolation. So, and teachers are just expected, the people at the building level are just expected to be flexible, roll with it.
Yeah. And here's the other thing is like in an ideal situation, right? If kind of like think of it like Spanish, right? If you had Spanish 1 this year, then you would hope that you would move into Spanish 2 next year, right? If you were going into like the lower level Read 180 or Achieve 3000 class this year, you would hope that next year you would move into the higher one, that it would be like a tiered system, to help people grow out and eventually no longer need it. That wasn't always the case, right? In terms of, staffing in our building, in terms of, the numbers and the where, kids have to go somewhere each period. What would end up happening is they'd start back over. The next year they just go back in because that was the only place that they could put them. But I think it's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting, Erica, because you touched on like a really fantastic topic, which is technology in terms of equity, right? So when
Mm-hmm.
we are looking at urban education, right? A lot of the times we have families that are coming from lower socioeconomic, areas, and what they don't always have computers or iPads or even, smartphones in their home. And when they
Mm-hmm.
do, it's like the parents are using them for their job. So there's not a lot of opportunities for students to get on technology from home in order to engage in technology in any other way other than like playful games or social media, right? Parents might hand
Mm-hmm.
their kid a phone so that they can, be quiet for a little bit, have a break, and,
Mm-hmm.
go on Facebook or TikTok or whatever it is. But when
Mm-hmm.
we, but what that transfers into, that impacts the classroom too, right? So we have students that are entering middle school, or at least back when I was teaching, pre-pandemic when our district was not one-to-one. With technology, and they had no idea how to open Microsoft Word
Nope.
and type out a paper,
No idea.
or how to save a paper, or how to attach a paper to an email, or attach a paper to some sort of platform. Like these are like the educational uses of technology that they just didn't have that experience in.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I can't even tell you, like they would try to figure out how to, um, like they were trying to type out their paper. And typically when we write a paper and we need to indent, we hit tab. They would just
Mm-hmm.
be penning space, however many times they felt it looked good, or they'd want to capitalize. You and I just hit shift in the letter and we moved on. They would be doing caps lock, undo caps lock. Like they just didn't have the computer skills in
Yeah.
order to be successful. And so ideally what equity would look like in urban education was maybe they would have a computer class where they are able to have those
Yep.
skills so that when they move into high school or after college, they've already learned those skills so that they can be successful in college or their job. Like these are like
Mm-hmm.
basic skills that are needed for that, that oftentimes the students just don't have the background knowledge for because they didn't have access.
Mm-hmm. Resources were, I think, applied to different areas that really didn't impact the long run, right? Like it just didn't translate into long run equity. Like it's like you said, they threw a whole bunch of stuff at the wall, hoped something would stick, and when it fell off the wall, they were like, well, oh well. Or they wouldn't even do anything to help make it stick, right? Like they wouldn't put some tape on it or like, you
Well,
know.
I mean, I don't want to say like we're talking negatively about the district, but I think that there's like all these additional things that go into it that people just don't realize, right? It's not that
Mm-hmm.
the district wanted to do things ineffectively, it's just that they didn't know and they didn't have the resources to keep up with it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's like even with the technology, like now the district is one-to-one, like every student has technology. So I think middle schoolers have iPads now, or at least they did when I
Mm-hmm.
was there, which, in theory is great. But, at the middle school level, now we are typing out answers to
Mm-hmm.
problems. Like we're typing
Mm-hmm.
out essays, we're typing out written responses. There's no keyboard, you
Just
know.
this year, Oscar or my son just got an iPad that has in the case a keyboard. That just happened this year,
Issued by the school.
issued by the school.
I want, is that, what about the school that you're a counselor at? Does that school offer
Oh
keyboards?
yeah, every kid in the
Oh,
district got one.
thank
Every kid,
God, because I had students that would buy Bluetooth keyboards, which they're like, my family did not have the funds to purchase this, but we're
but
writing an essay. And have you ever tried to type an essay on an iPad? I mean, on a cell phone, it's actually easier because it's like, smaller and you can
yeah,
twiddle your
it's
thumbs, but on
yeah,
an
yeah,
iPad,
yeah.
it's huge. Yeah, no, I get you. It is, and then there's the cost related to upkeep, right? iPads are not a forever resource. Like they're gonna
Mm-hmm.
eventually get
They
to a point
break.
they break,
They.
they
Mm-hmm.
become obsolete where, the older models are no longer serviced by the company. It's an ongoing thing.
Mm-hmm.
Education has changed a lot, even over the last 4 years.
Oh my
Um,
God, yes. So,
so
we'll move into the last part of this discussion. This has been awesome. So like what do you think? What do you think would bring equity. So, I researched all these different strategies, you know, but the whole emphasis I have in my paper is, what do urban educators think? The people who are at, like, on the ground, people who are in the buildings, what do you think would bring equity to the system?
Oh, Erica, you and your loaded questions. I feel like this could be like an entire research paper just on that one question.
Well, that's
Um,
what I did.
right. Exactly. But honestly, like when my definition equity is giving everyone they need in order to be successful, right? Some people need more than others. And so when we're looking at urban education, there is a lot of gaps. We look at how social factors impact personal factors, right? We look at why that achievement gap exists. Kids are entering preschool, and there's already an achievement gap compared to their more affluent peers. Kids that have more affluent parents typically, I'm not saying there's a causation, but there's a correlation, of course, where they are reading or have literacy or print knowledge, or I'm not an elementary teacher, but you get my point, where
I
they are
understand.
already
Yeah.
ahead of kids that are coming from a lower socioeconomic class. And what contributes to that? We're looking at terms of parents, right? Some parents are working two jobs to try and support their family and keep a roof over their head and food on the table. And what that means for them when they get home from work is that they might not have time, energy, or resources to
Mhm.
read with their child, to provide homework help, to provide additional assistance. I can tell you as a mom of a kid with special needs, and our family is not rich by any means, but we're also, we're comfortable. We're not poor, we're not below the poverty line like a lot of families are in urban education. Um, but even then, like my child with special needs, like I am literally drained by the time, I get off work. I've worked all day. I, you know, I don't know about you, but like when I get off work, I want like some downtime, right? There is no downtime when you get home and you have kids. You're
Mhm.
trying to like get dinner on the table, and then it's bath time, and then it's bedtime, and then, it just goes so quick that I am
Mhm.
like literally emotionally, physically, and mentally drained by the time. So, even me
Yeah.
sometimes trying to sit down and find 20 minutes just to read to my kids isn't always there. And so when you
Mhm.
couple that with families that are working two jobs, are struggling mentally with like the additional, like trying to make ends meet or health issues or, all the other barriers that they face, sometimes that
Mhm.
time is just not there. So when we're talking about how that relates to in the school setting, ideally what the school would be doing would be providing those, like helping to fill that gap for that student, right? We're not going
Yeah.
to be able to pay their bills. We're not going to be able to read to them at nighttime. We're not going to be able to, do those type of things that, typically happen at the home, but the school would be able to fill those gaps. What that would look like might be some additional, and we can get into this more too, is some additional, like a computer class, right? Um,
Mhm.
having a social emotional class. My daughter's
Mhm.
really lucky at her school that they have a whole curriculum of social emotional learning that they
Oh
do
my
every
gosh.
single day. They are teaching kids how to regulate their emotions, how to respond
Oh.
appropriately to other situations, how to do those things. But when we look at music class or art class, which these are all things that have been proven to have positive impacts on academic courses as well, your typical ELA, math, social studies, and science.
Mhm.
So we would be looking at adding those type of supports and additional services into the school. But on the flip side of that coin, when school districts have students that are reading significantly below grade level, when they're below in math, and what ends up happening is those classes aren't added, we get more, they choose to put more remediation into the schedule instead,
Yeah.
to try and boost those scores or help kids, improve.
Hmm.
Um, we try to do a double dose of ELA, or we try to do a double dose of math instead, which are all
Yeah.
great things that are needed to be successful, but but the district is limited in what they can do in terms of staffing and funding. So, the biggest expense is staffing, right? There's
Hmm.
no one to teach a class, or what typically gets cut is the non-essentials, right?
The
Music, art,
untested, the
yep, the
untested.
untested.
Hmm.
Music, art, those type of things get cut. And so we're kind of we're at a double-edged sword. Yeah, these kids need additional support in reading and math, but at the same time, they need these other outlets, these other
Right.
you know, I mean, music helps with math learning too.
Hmm.
But those type of things get cut. So it's like we're trying to give them equity, but we get in this like double-edged sword about what can be given, what resources are available, and what time we
Hmm.
have. I know that a lot of times, families in urban education start to consider charter schools, right?
Hmm.
Places like KIPP. And I think one of the things that they do is they try to extend the school day so that they can provide the additional time, I suppose, that's needed for
Hmm.
things like mentoring or extracurricular type things, extra intervention and remediation. But at the same time, I mean, you got to remember, we're talking about K-12 students, you
And they're
know,
kids, right? They're
they're
children.
kids. Is making their school day 8 or 10 hours? Is
No.
that really like, but I don't know about you, but like after I sat through a calculus class for 45 minutes, my brain was fried.
I mean, they're still
You know,
children.
are they
Yeah.
really getting any additional benefit, or are we actually, I don't know. I don't know what the test scores and what things look like at the charter schools. I know that there are places that are trying to accommodate all those additional needs, but it takes extra time. There's just not enough time in a typical traditional public school day
Hmm.
to try and embed all that, so that we've got to come to some sort of alternative plan. And I just don't have an answer for you what that looks like. I
Well,
don't.
like we were talking about exposure, right? Like, so at home, they may not be exposed to, families who've gone to college or
Yep.
have, like traditional professional careers. In their communities, they may not have exposure to, kind of those professional level businesses. They're going to get exposure to fast food restaurants and Dollar Trees and jobs that have like a minimum wage. And so like at school, if all we're exposing them to is ELA and math, although they are important, it's not like reaching every single kid's interest. So, like my son, he's into art. He's into drawing. His favorite class is art.
Yeah.
He loves to free draw. Who knows? Someday maybe he'll be a cartoonist or who knows? Like right now he's downstairs drawing all kinds of monsters. But, we encourage that at home because that's what he's interested in. If the schools are not thinking like that, right? Like a parent would think, like I want to expose my kid to as many different opportunities as possible. Like if we're not thinking like that, then yeah, the like our kids are not all going to become authors and mathematicians.
Mhm.
Some of them are going to want to become artists and musicians and mechanics and
So
chefs
maybe
and
the answer then is to do more integration of those things into the core oh gosh, I'm at a loss for words. The the core content areas, right? Math. One of the things I remember about teaching is that we have our building instructional coach come in, and I was having them work on we were working on plot and storyline, and one of the big things is they need to develop their characters. And so we're talking about using imagery and character development in our own writing. And so one of the initial projects that I had them do is they drew what their character was going to look like, so that when they went to go write about their character, they can start using those details in their writing to make it come to life. And I remember the AIC walking into my classroom and being like, why are you having them do an art project? What what's state standard is this related to? And how is this going to help them get better scores on the state exam? And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like this is a stepping stone towards that. So if we
Mm-hmm.
were, what was that program? Do you remember? Was it called Spring? Um, it was like art
Springboard.
springboard, right? It was,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that was like another
Yes.
really great way to integrate art into the content area so that you're kind of
Mm-hmm.
giving exposure to both. Because let's be real, if you are a struggling reader and all you're doing is like direct instruction every single day, skill instruction, that is it. It's not fun. What are you going to do? You're going to check out, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so maybe if we integrate the arts, it would bring to life and make it more fun and engaging because I don't know about you, but I hate doing things. I hate learning things that I'm not interested in, right? I check
Mm-hmm.
out. It's the same thing for our students. And we talk about the curriculum. The curriculum's not always relevant to them. Oh gosh, we were reading a book called Liddy. It was part of the seventh grade curriculum.
Oh, I
It was
remember Liddy.
Liddy. Some people love Liddy. If that's your jam, no harm to you, but you do
Uh-huh.
you. But for my seventh graders, they were not interested about a white girl during the Industrial Revolution and how she had to go to work each day. Like that was just not relevant. Like they were so bored. I called that book Read Aside. I
Yeah.
called it Read Aside because it killed the love of reading for them. And so, giving teachers some opportunities to choose some texts that are relevant and interesting to their students, that
Mhm.
might be the engagement that they need to actually engage. And, I always told my students, you pick a book you want to read because then it won't feel like a chore. And they would
Mhm.
tell me, they finally find a book they wanted to read and they liked and they didn't want to put down. And they're like, Miss G, reading is like TV in your head. And I'm like, yes, yes, it
Yes.
is. And so,
Yes.
once they develop that love and that passion, then they start to soar. That's when you see their
Mhm.
test scores come up. So if we're gonna, if and back to what you were saying, Erica, I'm going off on this tangent, but back to what
No,
you were
I
saying,
love it. I love it.
if we're able to incorporate arts and other things in the content area, we might not be able to have a separate, art class or a separate whatever class, but if the district is willing to bend a little on the curriculum and work those things in,
Mhm.
maybe that would be one way to provide equity to students within the
Mhm.
context of a regular school day.
Or like if the AIC or, the curriculum coach comes into your classroom and sees you doing something that's kind of outside of
The
the
box,
curriculum, the reaction isn't like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this? This is not, whatever. This is not helping test scores go up." Instead of having that perspective, say, well, why are you doing this? How is this helping kids? Okay, I can see that. Like, that's a great idea.
and you're
Supporting the teacher to make some of those decisions about what works best with your kids.
I
To say,
think
I
that
am
that's
trying to bring them this exposure. I'm helping them access this concept in their brain where they may not be able to access it in another way
right,
is
especially because different
important.
kids learn different ways. And I
Mhm.
think that, when we're looking at factors within the school that lead to student success, which are not directly related to curriculum or, what is explicitly taught in the classroom, one of the major factors is administration, right? The culture of the building. I would hope that principals are hiring teachers that they believe in, that they trust, that they believe will be a benefit to the students. And so having that trust and freedom
Mhm.
for the teacher to do what they believe is in the best interest of the students and
Mhm.
collaborate as a team because we got to remember everyone is working toward the same goal, which is student achievement.
Mhm.
So collaborating together as a team is
Mhm.
what's going to lead to student success.
Mhm.
Trust is going to lead to student success. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen.
Oh no, it definitely doesn't. It
But
definitely doesn't.
it's funny. some districts, as an academic advisor, I work with teachers that are literally in schools all over the entire state of Missouri. And the teaching experiences that they have and the district requirements are all over the board. I have some teachers that are not required to submit lesson plans at all. The district explicitly trusts them to do what is in the best interest of the students. And as long as their scores are improving and students are making gains, they are happy. If that doesn't happen, then that's a whole different conversation. But they lead with best intentions and the idea that everyone's doing what they're supposed to. And then I have other teachers, on the other hand, that are working in districts or in buildings, because it's not always district level, where they are required to write I'm not even kidding you, a
Mm-hmm.
12-page lesson plan for every single lesson that they teach. Now, if you're at like a middle school or high school level, right, you're likely teaching more or less the same lesson to different classes of kids. You might have to differentiate a little bit depending on the level
Mm-hmm.
of your class that's in front of you each, but it's more or less the same. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
at the elementary school level and you're teaching reading, social studies, math, and science every single day, that's 40 pages per day that you're writing. At some point, it
No
gets
one
to
has
be,
time for that.
yes, it ends up leading to teacher burnout,
Oh yeah.
and
And they're
ends
not
up
going to stay. They're not going to
right.
stay.
And then they're so like, and then oh gosh. And then the teachers are like, it becomes more of a not supporting the teacher, but then like a try to gotcha to the teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of supporting the teacher, helping them access curriculum that would make the lesson planning easier, more direct, consume less time so that they can spend times on things that are important, like, providing feedback to students, researching alternative methods to meet their students' needs, doing those type of things.
The things that
Um,
will actually help their kids experience academic success. Uh-huh. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep, yep. It becomes a now we're going to put you on a professional improvement plan. Now
Mm.
we no, I'm going to write you up because you didn't submit your lesson plan this week, which ends up leading to a negative relationship between them and the teacher. Don't get me wrong, if a teacher's not doing what they're supposed to, I'm all for it, right? But we got to look at things in terms of supporting the teacher so that they can impact students successfully. And if a teacher's completely burned out, they can't do any of those things.
Mm-hmm. And they have to be free to teach, right? Like one of the other things that I see a lot is teachers who are maybe new to urban education, right? They don't really understand the population in front of them.
Yeah.
And so what happens sometimes, and I'm seeing it, more and more frequently because of the teacher shortage, we are just kind of like desperate, right? We're desperate to get teachers in the building. And anyway, all right, that's a tangent that I won't go on. But you're not familiar with urban students. And so, you know, certain cultural aspects come along with, different groups of students. And
Yeah.
I would say understanding that is important, right? And if you don't understand that, it can be misinterpreted. And so you see a lot of teachers getting frustrated with the noise level or getting frustrated with certain clapbacks that come, or um oh, this student said a curse word, so they're going to go to. Now I'm not saying urban kids are disrespectful. I'm not saying urban kids don't know how to be in a classroom. They absolutely do. But there's a certain level of understanding that you need to have, cultural understanding with urban students, that if you don't take the time to understand your students, build that rapport,
Hmm.
reflect on your own biases, it can look like picking
Racism.
on kids. It can look like racism. Kids are constantly being put out of class for like real minor things that don't like that
Yeah.
aren't really disrespect, you know?
No, and I'm
And
totally with you, Erica. Like, and I think that you just made like literally the best point. And I think one of the points that it took me a minute to come to realization with when I first started, right? I did feel like coming from a suburban family, going into urban education, my first year especially, I kind of felt like it was a little bit of culture shock. I
Hmm.
wasn't used to kids having this really like not unprofessional, that's not the word I want to use, relaxed relationship
Direct,
with
very
their
direct,
teachers where they
straightforward. Uh-huh.
felt that it was okay to say things to their teachers. Whereas when I was growing up in school, like I sat there in class, I listened to the teacher, I did exactly what I was supposed to. And, whatever was told of me, I just did it. And I never spoke back to them because I knew my mom would murder me, right? And then I come into my classroom and it's like they're talking to me like kind of like I'm their friend. And it took some time to establish boundaries and, figure out where they were coming from. And I think that one of the things that you're talking about and how we can provide more equity to students in urban education would be some more professional development. I know that
Hmm.
districts are constantly trying to do like classroom management. Um, which is great. I am of the mindset that you can never get enough professional development on classroom management. Um,
Hmm.
I used to complain as a teacher that "Ugh, classroom management again at back to school PD, we do this every year." Trust me when I say, even if you've heard it over and over again, you pick up on something different each time
Hmm.
you attend one of those PDs because your mindset of thinking your first year is very different from your mindset of thinking your 10th year. And
Hmm.
also sometimes it's just a good reminder. Like kids really truly want to do the right thing and they want to be acknowledged and they want to be on task and they want to be recognized. So when we have students acting up in class, it's not that they're trying to give the teacher a hard time. Oftentimes it's they're having a hard time and they're trying to save some face. It's easier
Hmm.
to be the class clown
Exactly.
than
Yeah.
it is to be the student that doesn't know, right? People will
Right.
make fun of you, you're stupid, but if you're the class clown, then they laugh and they laugh with you. So it's just a
Hmm.
different thing of looking. So I think that in terms of professional development, what districts can do is they can talk about like um part of my master's degree for education was I had to take a class called um, examining community history and social justice in education. And it talked about,
Hmm.
it talked about all the social factors that impact education on multiple fronts, not just urban education, but, in terms of like kids that are ESOL and how their history impacts their learning. And I think a lot of the social aspects of that. And I think that when we're looking at education as what is happening in an individual classroom, teachers don't always have the background knowledge to understand how the social factors impact the student personally.
Hmm.
When a kid comes to your classroom, doesn't have any supplies, often the teacher gets upset with the student.
Hmm.
They don't come with a pencil, the teacher gets upset with the student. But sometimes what they don't realize is their family is truly, truly struggling to make ends meet. They might
Hmm.
truly not have the funds to purchase school supplies. I
Or
can't
even
tell
the
you,
time to ask mom or dad,
or go
like,
to the store and get it.
right, like you
I
don't have time to even have that conversation. The points of like, okay, my son will never come to me and say, but I'm an educator, so it's kind of hard to say, but like he will never come to me and say, I need to have more pencils. Like
Mhm.
I just know that because I look through his backpack every day. I see that there's no pencils in there, and I'm like, hey, do you need some more pencils, son? And
Right.
he's like, yeah, but that is not going to happen. Like
When
if
you're working
someone,
two jobs, right?
right.
I grew
And
up on my mom was a single mom and she was a hairdresser trying to support three kids. So I remember being in school and we lived in a suburban community. And I remember being in school and my track coach at the time, because we had a voucher so that I could do sports, said that we needed specific shoes and I knew that they were going to be expensive. He's like, they're only like $100. And I'm thinking, we can
there's no
barely make
way.
our rent. Like I, Erica, I didn't even want to ask my mom because I knew that was going to stress her out. She
Hmm.
wanted to give me everything I possibly needed to be successful, but sometimes like I literally remember her not eating dinner sometimes so that she could feed us instead. And I didn't want to
Oh,
exasperate that. So when we're
Mm-hmm.
looking at kids that are even living below the poverty line, which by the way, the poverty line is ridiculously low,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
ridiculously low. I don't even know how, I don't even understand that. But, you know, in terms of like, the teachers are upset that they didn't do their homework last night. Well, they had the lights turned off at their house. There was no way for them to do their homework because it was pitch black. Or,
Mm-hmm.
the students coming to school, and they smell.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the social factor is that they don't have hot water at their house right now. The hot water or
Mm-hmm.
the water has been turned off, or they don't have access to laundry, or they can't go to the laundromat. So,
Mm-hmm.
we were very fortunate at the school that we worked at. Do you remember when they had the washer and dryer in the
Yeah,
building?
yeah, yeah.
And so
Mm-hmm.
we would often do laundry for students, which made a big difference. So that was really lovely. But that's one way to, look at it in terms of equity. It was one of the things a school can do. But I think the teachers having this mindset of how social factors impact personal factors is
Mm-hmm.
exceptionally important for
Yes.
understanding the student where they're coming from. And it's not that they are unwilling or incapable, but there are barriers that are preventing them from being successful on those fronts.
Right. Like this past week, I helped to facilitate a conversation between a student and a teacher, right?
Mhm.
So the teacher is constantly putting the student out. She's saying that she's loud, she laughs too loud in class, and it's disruptive. She asks her to stop. She does eventually stop. When she calls her out in the hallway, though, now the student's mad. She doesn't want to talk to her. She says, if you don't want to talk to me, then you go to a buddy room. But the student's mad now, right? And so she's missing out on so much education,
Instructional time, yeah. But also
instructional
like,
time. She's
so now
not getting
the
her math. She's not getting it. And so I was like, well, let's have a conversation. Like let's sit down and have a conversation so that they can understand each other. And it was
Mhm.
great. The teacher was super willing to sit down. The student was actually able to open up a little bit and say, this is what it is. When I get mad, I shut down. I don't want to confront you, but I just can't speak. I can't talk about what's making me mad because I'm so mad. And so the two of them kind of they came up with a plan on how they would relate with each other, and how we could stop the kicking the kid out of class. So, but like just having that mindset of like, I want to figure out what's going on. I'm willing to kind of embarrass myself or like take a knee or whatever, like keep myself vulnerable or make myself vulnerable to say maybe I'm doing something wrong, maybe I need to adjust what I'm doing. That
try a new
takes a lot of
strategy.
guts to do that. Like I applaud the teacher. I really do applaud the teacher because it takes a lot of guts to be willing to say like, hey, I'm not sure if I know what I'm doing right or wrong in this situation. And it takes maturity, it takes a lot of different things. But it's almost like essential when working with any student, but especially urban students who have so many gaps and have so many needs and so many things going on in their lives. It's like an essential quality, you
I
know?
know.
So, like,
You
one
know,
of the strategies I looked at was restorative practices, right? And it actually comes from the prison system, like restorative justice. Remember that? Oh
mhm.
my God. Restorative justice comes from the prison system, which I hate because I think a lot of these schools are run like prisons.
Yep.
But the fact that the idea of restoring a relationship through conversation and figuring out like what it takes to repair it and then get back into the classroom and get to work. Whereas so many teachers I see, in a lot of different places I've worked, they want to just kick the kid out. They don't want to deal with it. They want them out of the classroom. I'm not teaching that kid. That kid's not allowed back in my room. It's like, no, you can't, you can't do that. You
No, and so,
you have to
I always
figure it out.
say that, that saying that goes around, the kids don't care what you know until they know that you care is so
Mm-hmm.
cliche, but it's also so true. So,
Yeah.
what I've noticed in urban education, which is totally different from my education growing up, is that the kids, I hate to say this, they'll work for you if they like you. And it's not your job to make them like you as a teacher, but in some cases, yeah, they got to know that you care about them. If they know
Mm-hmm.
that you care about them, then the criticisms that you give them, the feedback that you give them, even if it's not what they, even if it's negative,
Mm-hmm.
they understand that it's coming from a place of caring and it's
Mm-hmm.
coming from a place of support so that they can move forward. The problem I have with people kicking kids out of class or even the buddy room system is that it damages the relationship, right? Now
Yeah.
it's a conflict between me and you. I'm kicking you out of class because you did something wrong. I don't even want you here. Get out.
Yeah.
And so what does that do to a 12-year-old? How does that
Right.
damage their self-esteem? And then even when they do come back, their frontal cortex is not fully formed. So it might take them a while to get past that.
Right. I'm mad
Um,
at you. I'm not going to
I'm
listen to
mad,
you because I'm mad at you.
right? Or the kids that are struggling in class and that are acting out as a way to save face. Well, now you've kicked them out and they just got exactly what they wanted. They did not want to be in your class. Now they get to go hang out in the buddy classroom with different kids, or now they get to go hang out in the office and they don't got to do the work, and now they're falling
Mm-hmm.
further behind and making that achievement gap wider. You know,
Mm-hmm.
please don't misconstrue what I'm saying. There are times where a student is having
And
a
they need a
real
break.
bad day, and they do
Mm-hmm.
need a break and they do need to leave, but how it's handled needs to be done appropriately. So that that restorative piece that you brought up is essential. I always would bring the kids out in the hall, half in, half out the door, have a private conversation with them, not in front of the whole class. What's
Mm-hmm.
going on, man? This is not how you normally act. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is what I'm seeing as an issue. I know that you're usually like really hardworking. I know you're struggling a little bit, but I know you're hardworking and you're going to get there eventually. What's going on? And they might tell me, I just had a rough night, or I just had a fight with a friend, or my boyfriend or girlfriend broke up with me, or whatever it is. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I am so sorry to hear that. I know you're having a rough day. How about this? Why
Mm-hmm.
don't you go get a drink of water real quick, reset, come back in 3 minutes, and then we will try again. Okay. Or do you want to go
Mm-hmm.
sit at the back of the classroom by yourself, isolated, and do your work back there? Would that help?
Mm-hmm.
This whole restorative stuff, and you're right, I know it comes from the prison systems, but it can be done effectively in schools
I agree.
to help students succeed, stay in the classroom. Because the other thing is, in school suspension, urban educators have such high rates of out of school and in school suspension. And the problem with that is then they are out of the classroom, they are not receiving instruction, and we are widening the achievement gap. It's not to say
Yeah.
that there's not a place for those, because sometimes there truly is.
Sometimes it's needed. Yes.
But the rate that we go that route, there needs to be additional training for staff for how to incorporate, build relationships with students. A lot of times administrators will say, "Did you build a relationship with the student?" And the teachers are like rolling their eyes, like, "Yeah, I've tried." But have you truly?
Like, have you really? Like, what did that look like? Were you
You know,
vulnerable? Were
right.
you
For me,
willing to apologize? Were you willing to really listen?
and
You
take their
know?
feedback into consideration. Teaching
Mm-hmm.
someone and being taught is a mutual relationship. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I used to cringe when I would see my school roster for homeroom or the class that I would get doubled that day or that year, because it would always have the high, what do they call them, the heavy hitters, right? The kids that
Mm-hmm.
were like regularly, I don't want to say troublemakers, but whatever. I would kind of cringe because I'd be like, man, they shoved them all in my class again this year. But I realized that they gave those students to me because I was able to handle them.
Mm-hmm.
It'd crack me up because they would cut up in everyone else's class, but they'd come to my class and they'd want to be there and they'd act really cool. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the time, even I had a couple that I really struggled with that really were all my patients. Uh, I came home and I had a couple glasses of wine after teaching them sometimes. But honestly, in most cases, if I just like brought up something that was totally unrelated to class or content, like, hey, where's the best place to get pizza in the city? Like, I really am craving some pizza. Like, do you know a good place? Or, hey, what was the last good movie? I want to watch a movie this weekend, something like, on Netflix or something. I don't know what to watch. You got any suggestions? Just kind of like building a relationship with non-related stuff is a really safe way to go about doing that. And then, after you get your foot in the door that way,
Mm-hmm.
then you can start building the academic relationship. And
Hmm.
sometimes that's also a really good way to get their little friends on board too, right?
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree.
But teachers don't always have that training.
One of the things I always tried is to like remember, you know, who's in their family, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, like
Oh
try to
yeah.
remember their family dynamic so I could ask questions like, how's your mom doing? Is this okay now? Or, like
How's
just
baby brother?
right, like just remembering all those things that are unique to them, um,
Because I
I
remember,
feel like
Erica,
helped.
I
Huh?
remember we went to your classroom one day and there was a student that you had not had before because you were a sixth grade teacher and so they were new to the building. But I remember them coming up. There was like an open house before school started, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, do you remember so and so?" And you said, "Yeah," and you're like, "Oh yeah, that's my brother." Yeah, they said you're really cool. Like you expect them to do their work and do what they're supposed to, but they said you're really cool, right? And so like word just got around the neighborhood that you were good at developing those relationships with, families. And so,
Hmm.
it also kind of helped you in the classroom down the line too.
Like I had your brother, I had your sister, I had your
Yeah.
yeah.
But I'm telling you, like, I've never had a professional development on how to, develop a relationship with students or explanations of how that impact the classroom. I feel like everyone glosses over it, but in
Hmm.
urban education, that is so very important.
It's the core, right? It's the core to, yeah, to academic success.
But the
But
other thing
yeah.
that comes along with that is a lot. I know social emotional learning is just like it's kind of been a hot topic thing that's up over the last like 4 or 5 years. I feel like we always tried to do they didn't used to call it, they used to call it character ed, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
To some degree. But especially as an output of the pandemic, right? Coming out of the pandemic, where we had students that were returning to school, especially at the elementary level, and they had missed the foundational building blocks of their education. Because let's be real, your first couple years, especially in elementary school, online is not the same as being in a classroom. And they just didn't have those social skills yet, or how to behave in a classroom, or how to regulate those emotions, or how to do all those things so that they can
Hmm.
stay in a classroom and learn and be effective with their peers. Because learning how to work with peers is also a social or soft skill that's, required for academics,
Hmm.
to be successful. But, finding ways to integrate that into the classroom. I'm not saying that we necessarily need a separate social emotional learning class. It's really
Hmm.
nice for districts that are able to incorporate that into their school day. That's wonderful. With urban schools that don't necessarily have the resources, staff, or ability to do that, how can we incorporate some of those kind of conversations into the context of what's already being learned in the curriculum? Whether if it's literature, can we talk about a decision a character made, how they
Right.
handled that decision, what they could have
Hmm.
done better? How would you have responded in that situation? Which all lead to academic games too. Like these are all like characterization, conversations, skill-based conversations, but in the context of how can it be emotionally done? But that integration piece, that is not something that is innate for teachers. Like you have to have some training on that. And so I
Hmm.
think that, districts in terms of providing that additional training would be essential. But again, that costs money, that costs planning. Then you're also having to
Yeah.
pay the staff to attend those trainings. So how can we build that into what we already have?
Hmm. I think for me, it comes down to using your funds because the school districts have money, right? Like urban school
Yeah.
districts have money. Um, it's about using your funds in a way that really best support your kids. And how do you figure that out? I personally believe it comes down to conversations with other urban educators,
Yeah.
at the building level. What do you see? What do you see is the need? Where do you think we could spend money? And how would we spend that money? I think whole district initiatives are tricky because they're not
Mhm.
going to be well suited for every single building. Um, But I do think there could be some like whole district initiatives like restorative just or restorative practices. There are certain things that could be whole district, but allowing some autonomy to the teachers, to the principals, to the support staff, allowing some autonomy to figure out like, hey, this is what really would best support our kids.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. And the staff for that too. I think one of the things that we were talking about before we officially started recording was attendance.
mhm,
And how attendance leads to outcomes from students. I once read that if they miss like, oh gosh, please don't quote me on this because I won't have it right. I don't have the data in front of me, but it was something like if they missed one day per month or something like that over the course of their school year, they're missing like a whole semester of schooling or something to that
mhm,
effect. Um, and that's a lot, right? And so,
mhm.
when I think about when I was in the classroom and how frequently some of my students would be absent,
Like daily someone would be absent. Yep.
and we had an attendance officer, they called them DJOs, that would contact families, especially if they had like made it to however many times that they've already been absent. The district had a certain number, and then it's like truancy and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm,
And so the families would get involved, but a lot of times, like it was stuff that, again, these social factors factor in. Um,
mhm.
we had middle schoolers, so I'm talking 11 and 12-year-olds that were helping out at their family restaurant. I
Yeah.
remember specifically during COVID, I had one student who will remain who will remain nameless. Um, but our district didn't require them to turn on their cameras. They didn't want them to, they felt it was like a violation because some of them didn't have great home situations to see
Mhm,
them and their background with their home. So they allowed them to have their cameras off, which most students chose to do. But during COVID, what he would do is he would turn on his iPad, he would attend class at the right time, he would turn on his iPad, and then he would just let it play while he went to work for his family. And then even when we went back in person, he was missing at least 1 or 2 days per week because he
mhm.
was needed at the family restaurant. And we're talking 11 or 12-year-old who was working to help put a roof over the family's head and food on their table,
Mhm.
to have their bills paid. Like they were truly relying on him. So when we're looking at attendance, sometimes it's more than just the kid didn't want to come to school.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes it's that, something is going on in the family. Sometimes it's that they themselves are sick or a relative is sick. Sometimes the family car has broken down. They
Yeah.
can't afford the repairs and they don't have a bus. They
Yeah.
can't physically get to school.
Mhm.
Or, um, you know, a lot of our parents come from single parent households. So, okay, if mom has to go to work and she has to be at work at 8 o'clock, but drop off at the school doesn't start till 8:15, that's a
Mhm.
problem for her because she's going to perpetually be late and potentially get fired.
Mhm.
Or they overslept because parent was working overnight shift. And there's just so many different things that go in. It's not always that the kid just didn't want to come to school and didn't show up. There's just
Right.
so many different things that need to be understood so that the school can step in with a counselor, with a
Social worker.
social worker, with a attendance officer, with whoever, so that we can support the family in getting the kid to school so that they can have academic achievement and move on to a post high school, either
Yeah.
career or college.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with the after you were talking about after the pandemic and not having buses, like,
Oh,
after
yeah.
the pandemic, we didn't have bus drivers and so many buses weren't running, right? And so, like you said, they may not have a vehicle, they may not have funds to pay for an Uber or whatever it is to get to school.
Mhm.
They are relying on the bus. They're relying on that to get to school. There's no other way it can happen.
Do you
We had
remember the bus that we had a problem with a bus at our school district every single time? I think it was the one that was going to the Hodiamont complex. They
mhm.
just like wouldn't pick up the kids in the morning, or they would pick them up extremely late
Yeah.
and then they would miss
Mhm.
their first period class. I don't know the reason behind that. But
Mm-hmm.
again, another factor that's outside the student's control.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I'm looking at our time. We're at 2 hours, so I don't want to use up all of your time. I thank you so much for doing this with me.
Of course.
I here's my cat. Um, I think you're amazing. You're an amazing educator, not just urban educator, but you're an amazing educator. And I thank you for all the support you've given me over the years as as an urban educator. And I think that urban education is a better place because of you.
Oh, I
So
think
I
it's the
just want to
same
say
about
that.
you. So, for those of you that are listening and don't know, Erica is a incredible counselor.
Oh my gosh, stop.
We used to no, I'm gonna sing you a couple praises because I know you'll never toot your own horn. We used to tease Erica as being like the soft one in the building because all the kids would come to her and be like, kind of like give her all of her problems. Like even when she wasn't a counselor, when she was a classroom teacher, they would come up during lunch and want to spend time with her and talk about this, that, and the other thing. And just having Erica as a positive adult role model in their lives, like I think was completely transformative for a lot of those kids. And I think that it truly got them invested in their education. It got them invested in the school. I don't think that they would have wanted to come to school if it wasn't for Erica. And she set them up for success, not only in her classroom, but for their entire middle school career. It completely changed the trajectory. And just having that one person that I'll call like a mentor, because you were like their mentor, completely changed everything for some of those girls and boys, right? And so when you moved into the role of the school counselor, I was just like, it's about time, right? Like
Oh my God,
it's about
stop.
time. And so now that you are doing that full time and able to truly use your superpowers for good, right? And to support them, honestly, I feel like you're where you're meant to be, Erica. So I'm just so proud of you.
Oh God, stop it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, my dear.
I will end our recording and recording has stopped. Cass.